Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mad Mamluks podcast. My name is Sim. Along with me are my co-hosts Noreen, and we have a wonderful show for you this evening. Before we get to our topic of the evening, we'll give a quick shout out to our sponsors. HalfHourDeen.com is the place where you go for the private matrimonial experience. If you know of anyone who is interested in finding a significant other, refer them to HalfHourDeen.com for the private matrimonial experience. Get them away from the swipe left and swipe right game. HalfHourDeen.com. WahidInvest.com is a website dedicated to halal investing. Make sure your income is being generated in a halal manner. Go to WahidInvest.com. And finally, MyWasiya.com is a website dedicated to creating a Sharia compliant will. Go to MyWasiya.com for your personalized legal will. Assalamu alaikum, how y'all doing? We have another episode, and it's a surprise episode because I wasn't sure if I want to do it live or not because of a whole lot of reasons, just because we go live a lot and sometimes it can be too much. But anyway, we have a wonderful episode for you guys this evening. We have Sister Aydin Anwar, who is a Uyghur activist who she is a fourth-year undergrad student at Duke University, majoring in International Comparative Studies. She's focused a lot of her work on the plight of the East Turkestan and its occupation through her fieldwork of Uyghur refugees in Turkey and organizing at a lot of conferences. She's appeared in a lot of recent media outlets like TRT, Al-Jazeera, Now This.
Wow.
A lot of her recent views have gotten as much as 60 million downloads. So that's pretty amazing. Aydin, how are you handling a lot of the newfound celebrity that's come your way because of bringing this important topic to people's attention? And especially it's tough because it's people generally don't want to hear sad news, and
that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, seeing that many views was it was a good thing because for so long, this was an issue that a lot of people have not known about. And to see that finally, things are going a little bit viral I felt like some of our efforts were kind of being seen and that people were actually starting to pay attention. We're actually shocked to hear what was happening because essentially what we have, and we'll obviously touch on this later, but we see almost like a brewing genocide taking place.
Yeah. I mean, when I heard about this, it was just a lot of thoughts came into my mind when I was growing up about the Bosnian genocide, and that was something that really hit home to me. Well, not necessarily hit home because I'm Indian and not very Bosnian looking at all, nor do I know any Bosnians. But we're Muslims and we have this connection to our global Muslim community. And when I was young, we were always taught about Muslim Brotherhood, not the organization Muslim Brother, but the actual Muslim unity that we have this concern for one another. And I'm just humbled and honored to have someone like you on who is representing the Uyghur community and telling us a little bit about the struggles that they're facing. Struggle is a mild word. It's really a genocide. And tell us a little bit about yourself and how your family came to the States and
your story. Yep.
So I was born and raised in the Washington D.C. suburbs, specifically Fairfax, Virginia. So alhamdulillah, I myself, and so my family is from East Turkestan, which is a nation under the occupation of China. And throughout this podcast, I won't be saying China or I won't necessarily be saying we're from China or what China calls our region as Xinjiang, which actually means new territory, because calling the region Xinjiang is actually considered really offensive because it's a colonial name. And to put things into perspective, it's there's an analogy that I often use to illustrate why it's offensive to call the region Xinjiang, and it's because if you imagine yourself, you've been named something your whole life, and then someone kidnaps you and then renames you as new property in the language of the oppressors. And then everyone who vouches for you then calls you by that new name. So, and the original name of our land is East Turkestan, which actually means the land of the Eastern Turks. And and I can touch base back later on, in a bit about like, who we are as a people, and what our ethnicity is, what our culture is like. So my family hails from East Turkestan, and they came to the United States. My dad came in 1988. My mom came in 1991. My dad came as one of the first Uyghur political asylees in the United States, and so me and my siblings were all born here. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and throughout my life, I've kind of spent a lot of my time so I was raised under the shadows of my dad's political activism. He's a political activist and has essentially dedicated his entire life to trying to liberate his people. In 2004, he established the East Turkestan government in exile, and he's one of the prime leaders of the independence movement of East Turkestan. So growing up, I kind of, a lot of my childhood was spent. I remember going to protest demonstrations in Washington, D.C., hearing about the atrocities. But at the time, I never really fully understood what these meant. I kind of just went with the flow and was just would chant along.
Slow down. Wait, this has been going on since you were a kid? Because most of us found out about this at least a year ago, and whoever is even just remotely politically conscious, those darn Chinese, we gotta tell them to stop,
So this is something that everyone thinks is a new thing. They're like, oh, concentration camps holding Muslims, and but this is actually, so to put into context, East Turkestan again is a nation under the occupation of China, and we've been under the occupation most recently since 1949 when Communist China came to power. Before then, we lived with centuries of independence until we were invaded by the Manchu Qing Empire in 1759, and then multiple rebellions occurred. And essentially, when the Manchu Qing Empire collapsed in 1911, that's when nationalized China came to power, and that was the first official Chinese invasion that took place. And then multiple rebellions occurred, and then we had the establishment of the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1933, and that was shortly crushed. And then there was also another formation of this East Turkestan Islamic Republic in 1944, and then 5 years later, that was crushed with the help of the Soviet Union.
The listeners are now seeing East Turkestan and where it's located. Obviously, it's east of China, and the name itself is very curious because people don't associate Turks with Chinese, and when you see East Turkestan, you always thought oh, that's part of China. They must have the Great Wall somewhere nearby over there, and tell us a little bit about how Muslims ended up over there.
So what we see there is the Uyghur homeland, and so if you look at the map that was just shown, it's on the northwest part. It was the blue flag. The flag looks exactly like the Turkish flag, but it's light blue. It's right above Tibet, and again, we are an occupied territory, and so we were actually centuries ago. We lived towards the Mongol Empire, and then we the Mongolian area, and then we kind of migrated down, but essentially that Uyghur homeland has been in existence for centuries, and if you go to the region, certain parts, you can see people go there and they're like tourists or foreigners who go there for the first time, they're like, how the heck is this China? This does not look anything like it. And I'm talking about particularly certain towns and villages, not the big cities where it's right now a lot of Han influence, but people who go there are shocked because they're like, there's no way this is China, because the people don't even look Chinese. The language that we speak isn't even Chinese. It's a Turkic dialect. So Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group. A lot of our culture.
Go ahead and expound on that for our listeners, because a lot of people just associate Turks with Turkey, and talk a little bit about the Turkic people in general.
Yeah. So, the Turkic people is a huge, population, and it comprises of different ethnicities. So it's not just people in Turkey. It's people from Central Asia, so East Turkestan, you have the Uyghurs, and then you have Uzbekistan, you have Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and you have a lot of these ethnicities, not just Uyghurs, who are also living within East Turkestan as well. So the Uyghur population itself is around 35 million, and there's an estimated additional 5 million other Turkic people living within East Turkestan, majority of whom are Kazakh. It's interesting because China actually lowers these numbers as much as possible, and they claim that we are a population of around 11, 12 million, and that's a way to just basically lower numbers by paper. But essentially, right now, they're trying to lower these numbers in physically as well and culturally by trying to forcibly assimilate us into the Chinese state. But yeah, if you go to the region, like we're Turkic by ethnicity, and we're our religion is, everyone there is pretty much Muslim. You see our culture has been embedded, like without Islam, like we have no culture. And you can, if people who've gone there, you can see that through your eyes, just the fact that there's like a mosque on every block of the street. And people's culture and lifestyle is basically framed around Islamic way of life. And even if you go to Kashgar, for example, like that was like the capital of the Karahan Empire, and they had Islamic institutions really based there, and a lot of the sciences, arts, music, and scholarly material were actually framed around these Islamic institutions that were built there. So, and Islam actually came to the region so Uyghurs actually originally used to practice Buddhism, Manjism, and shamanism, but then we had conversion into Islam in the 10th century during the Karahan Empire, and particularly with the help of one sultan named Sultan Stukh Bughra Khan, and he was one of the first Turkic rulers to convert to Islam, and from then that sparked the Islamization of much of Central Asia. So alhamdulillah, since then we've all been, I would say 99.999% of Uyghurs actually identify as Muslim.
Yeah, anyone who's like studying Islamic history, you read about some of the expeditions that many of the Khulafa had sent to the western parts of China, and now you see a result of that. You kind of understand, and then that those stories kind of formulate or crystallize in your mind, because as you're seeing Sister Aydin here, who is a result of some of those expeditions to China.
Right.
But talk a little bit about what the people are like in present day East Turkestan.
So because China's
in terms of like religiosity, because the way China is like the way they're painting them out to be is that there's an existential threat that's coming from the Uyghur Chinese, the Uyghur Muslims to the Chinese, that they are somehow going to take over with Sharia law or some kind of some kind of a religious fanaticism.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how their practice of Islam is.
So that's a really broad question, because right now, at this very moment, it's almost impossible to practice Islam in East Turkestan. So if I want to talk about this very current moment, essentially China is using the global war on terror launched by the US as an excuse to claim that we are terrorists, that we are people who are likely to be infected with a quote ideological illness, which is Islam, which could then transfer into terrorism and violent acts. And they equate separatism with terrorism. Even though honestly, even the term separatism is problematic, because separatism implies that we've always been a part of the Chinese state, which is not true. We're actually an occupied territory. So, for those who are trying to seek an independent state, we would say these are people who are trying to restore independence and not necessarily separate from the state, because we're not.
But why are they calling you guys? Why do they consider Uyghur Muslims a threat? What is so threatening? What has been happening that's led up to this?
Okay, so I would say that so there have been terrorist attacks that have happened. There have been incidents of violence occurring within certain cities. There was a recent knife attack in, I think, 2013 that had killed around 30 Han civilians, for example, or or like the most recent riot protests that occurred in 2009 in Urumqi, for example, that ended up being a really violent breakout between ethnic Han and Uyghurs, which led to the death of hundreds of people, the arrest of thousands of people, and disappearance of thousands of Uyghurs. And since then, China has essentially been using these incidents of violence to basically further crack down on us and say that we are cracking down on Islamic extremism and these people are a threat. So, but essentially this is also a big territorial issue. And that's something I want to emphasize, is because if this was about being Muslim, you'd also see the Hui Muslims who live in mainland China also being rounded up into concentration camps, for example. So this right now isn't actually an issue of ethnicity and territory, but they're using religion as a huge excuse to crack down on us and essentially claim that if anyone who has any slight ties to religion, they are essentially at risk of becoming a terrorist. So right now, practicing Islam is completely banned. For example, praying is banned, fasting is banned. I can't, like, an Uyghur wouldn't even be able to say Assalamu alaikum. You can't even say the word Allah. You have to replace the word Allah with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, or the CCP. So instead of saying so like in Uyghur Chinese, we don't, if you don't say inshallah, the Uyghur way of saying is Khuda in Bursa, right? Khuda means God. So you'd have to replace Khuda with Allah. With Xi Jinping or CCP. So you'd be like, oh, CCP Bursa or Xi Jinping Bursa.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's come to, you can't, like, in the prisons they force the detainees to yell, instead of saying Allahu Akbar, they would have to yell Xi Jinping Akbar. And you have to, and even if you go into a mosque, which are nowadays essentially completely empty, and you go into the mosque, there's surveillance, there's on top of the minbar, there's actually a picture of Xi Jinping that you have to make sujood towards. So they're essentially trying to convert like Islam, or they're trying to
brainwash.
Shift people's devotion to God to the Chinese state, and they're forcing them to become atheists. Essentially, now they have reports of people being forced to drink alcohol, eat pork. You're obviously not allowed to wear hijab.
So are people hiding their Islam at this point?
So right now it's like, yeah. So essentially, like, Islam is kept within your heart, because even right now, like, there is no private space. There's no such thing as private space, because even in the homes, they're actually surveilling Uyghurs within the home. So they actually have Han government like officials and civilian workers to live inside Uyghur homes to make sure you're not engaging in religion and to assess your political views. And so they'll literally they're encouraged to sleep under the same covers, like literally sleep on the same bed as Uyghur families. And they claim, what China claims is that this is a way to unite, to promote ethnic unity between ethnic Han and Uyghurs. And so
that's a new term for a lot of. We were just talking about the ethnicities. Now you mentioned Han a couple times. People don't know what Han is, and can you just tell them a little bit about what the Han are?
So the ethnic Han is the Han people are one of the ethnicities living within China. They're the majority, and recently, and they speak Mandarin, and they're and ever since the occupation, specifically since the 1990s, we have mass migration flows from mainland parts of China to East Turkestan, to the point where, like, these major cities of East Turkestan, like Urumqi, are now majority Han. And what's caused a lot of tension between the two ethnicities is the fact that, and they'll be coming to these regions because East Turkestan is really rich in minerals and resources, and there's a lot, and then it's also really spacious. Obviously, there's also lots of job opportunities. So they would incentivize Han people to migrate to and live in East Turkestan, and so it's essentially, we see the Han migration and as like the colonizers, or
it kind of sounds to me like the situation that the North Koreans are under, right?
Yeah. But Aydin, I always hear this from the Han Chinese that there's things that the Uyghurs did that they don't tell you. They don't tell everyone about that. There's inherent hostilities from the Uyghur population that they never talk about. Is there any truth to that? Is there any merit to that claim, or is that just kind of them disguising
fear mongering?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So a lot of the tension has risen because of this like increasing tension, like the fact that like Uyghurs have been like driven into poverty because ethnic Han are migrating into the region. You know, we're basically living under the effects of an occupation, and you know, and people are Han are taking jobs or living are always like even if an Uyghur were to go to like the best colleges in China, the people who get priority when it comes to getting jobs are ethnic Han, and so these kind of tensions have been existing, um, and when these when the few acts of violence occur, then China has used these as and has have amplified these and been like, look, these people are dangerous, they're extremists, and now they've and the ethnic Han people, a lot of Chinese people who are living in China actually honestly get really brainwashed by the government. Even honestly, Chinese international students here at my school, or and elsewhere as well, they are really seeped into the narrative produced by the Chinese government. The Chinese government essentially claims that that East Turkestan or Xinjiang has always been a part of China, that we are one of the ethnic minorities, even though like even calling us an ethnic minority is problematic because within relation to our own homeland, like we are a majority, and like that land belongs to us, and that we are Chinese. Like they promote these narratives that are problematic and are
Wait,
that
are there any jihadist groups in Xinjiang or the Uyghur population? Is there any organized revolt? Is I think the main question. Is there any legitimate claim that the Chinese can make that, hey, there is an existential threat to our nation that we're trying to stamp out?
Yeah, so I mean, so right now, I mean that kind of group cannot, even if word exists, it cannot exist within China because that's essentially impossible. Like even having a gathering within your home for more than 5 people can like send you to one of the concentration camps. But outside of China, this is something that China has also completely exaggerated and blew out of proportion. There's claiming that outside of China, there are these huge jihadist groups who are going to essentially wage war and basically blow up all of East Turkestan. They claim that there's an explosion in East Turkestan every single day, which is not true. Right now, people who actually go to East Turkestan are saying like, oh, it's actually quote safer because there's police everywhere because they've employed massive surveillance states. But so there have been like, even if there are people who are preparing for warfare, like there have been reports of like Uyghurs who have gone to Syria, probably a few dozen of them who are essentially going there with the intent of trying to be trained so they can try to like essentially fight back eventually. But these efforts are not being successful anyways, and China is using these as excuses to essentially claim that 35 million people are prone to this extremism. And so it's interesting because China claims that we are extremists, but what they're doing right now to the Uyghur people, and they claim that we are terrorists, but what they're doing is actually enacting terror on us. They are
right. They're
the true
terrorists. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, like so the slide that we see here, so China has essentially spent billions of dollars actually employing massive surveillance systems to monitor the actions of Uyghurs. So if you go out on the streets of East Turkestan, if you walk out of your house and let's say you want to go to the grocery store, you have to walk through multiple checkpoints. You have to have your ID. Your body is invasively scanned. You go through facial recognition technologies. Your fingerprint is scanned. They detect your voice. They also have you have to have mandatory GPS devices on your car so they can track your movement. And now they've also mandatory collected DNA samples, retina scans, and voice prints of Uyghur people. And so going out just to run an errand is such a huge hassle, to the point where even ethnic Han who are living in East Turkestan are sick of it, and they're they don't even want to go outside because they're this is too much. But the thing was with ethnic Han, even if they want to go through security, even if there are security checkpoints, there are 2 lanes usually. There's 1 lane for Uyghurs and 1 lane for ethnic Han. If you're ethnic Han, you just walk past, and if you're Uyghur, you are subject to these really invasive surveillance technologies. They also, your phone, for your phone, you're made to download this app that essentially kind of goes through your phone and checks to see if you have any quote terrorism related information on it. So for example, let's say you had, how our friends like send us like photo, or like our moms or would send us like photos on WhatsApp with like a little girl making dua or something.
Yeah.
Or like just, or something like Eid, like if on Eid, like everyone's sending Eid Mubarak messages, that itself is considered a sign, like that could actually send you to one of the concentration camps. And it's so your phone is detected. Like they've sentenced like thousands of people to prison or these camps because, for example, they found audio recordings on an Islamic lecture, for example, or someone had said "Assalamu alaikum" in their messages. And again, like these apps, or the apps that they use, which is particularly WeChat, is actually monitored by the government. So there is no free space to even engage or have a discussion freely in the way they want. And so, yeah, and then obviously like surveillance in Uyghur homes and mosques.
Yeah, let's move on from the surveillance to the actual. I mean, we're starting off, I guess, from the mildest to some of the most severe things that they're doing.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what the climate is like. I know you said like you can't even make the mildest Islamic gesture these days. You can't even say "Assalamu alaikum" to someone. Right. And I think what kind of what happens essentially once you get caught by saying something that is in Islamic, a term that's associated with Islam?
So also, one thing I wanted to mention is within the Uyghur homes, when they're surveilling when they're surveilling you, if they can't outright show that you are in some way or form practicing religion. So, for example, if they're like, "Okay, do you believe in a God?" and you force yourself to say no, they'll test you and be like, they'll pull out a cigarette and then they'll see your reaction to that cigarette and basically essentially force you to smoke. And if you refuse to smoke or take that cigarette, that's a sign for you to be sent to the camp. So essentially, what these concentration camps are, and we've been mentioning this a few times since the podcast has started, and I haven't been able to delve into it. These concentration camps are framed by the Chinese government as these re-education centers. Essentially, their claim is that we need to re-educate the Uyghur people because they are dangerous people who've been infected with a, quote, ideological illness that needs to be eradicated from its roots. And so any sign that you are practicing religion, that is a big sign for you to be sent to the camps. If you also, another thing that is banned is actually speaking our native tongue, the Uyghur language. That is now systematically banned across East Turkestan. You cannot speak it in the workplace. You cannot learn the language. You cannot speak amongst your coworkers, and you're actually forced to speak the ethnic Han language, and that's called the language of the nation. Like you have to be like, oh, we're speaking the national language right now. So China is essentially attempting, and basically in these concentration camps, they're forcing Uyghurs to, and not just Uyghurs, other Turkic Muslims who are living there. So Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and actually a few Hui people, they are forced to denounce Islam, adopt atheism, and essentially pledge allegiance to the Chinese state as God. And with increasing criticism, China then claimed that these were vocational training centers, even though the majority of the detainees are people with well-founded careers, are retired or they're elderly. Like you have people who are 80, 90 years old who are in these camps.
Well, the viewers are seeing what the vocational center looks like right now.
Yeah.
And I think that looks far from any vocational center that I know of.
But, exactly. And there's also like young teenagers who are in these camps or in these quote vocational training centers when in reality they should be in school. And the question is like, if these are really schools, then why are people detaining these facilities for more than 2 years? Like if it's a normal school, you'd come home at the end of the day. You wouldn't be in these like prison-like conditions. And to be clear, so what's happening in these camps is like, there's a clear attempt to essentially make us into Chinese people. They're trying to make us into ethnic Han. They're forcing people to sing Chinese propaganda poetry, forcing people to memorize and sing certain Chinese propaganda songs. They're claiming that, we're like using these camps as a way to teach the Uyghur people the Chinese language so they can better integrate into society. But what's ironic about that is that actually majority of the people who are in these camps are people who are like fluent in Chinese. Like they've grown up going to Chinese schools, and like you have like top professors, like presidents of like the university, like president of the Xinjiang Medical University, for example, was like, I think recently sentenced to death, or like thousands of people and hundreds of academics who are in the region and are contributing to Chinese society in positive ways. Like they're people, like they're surgeons, they're academics, they're teachers, they're engineers, there are people in all sorts of fields who are being sent to these camps. And it's because of one thing. It's because they're Uyghur and they have some type of influence. And right now China is trying to erase anything that kind of sheds light on Uyghur influence or intellectual power or positive change within the community. So in these camps, again, they're forced to essentially speak Chinese. They claim that if once you master the Chinese language, you'll be released, and that has been shown that it's completely false. Because even if they do get released, it means that they are being sent to the factories that they've built within these camp facilities to essentially become modern day slaves to produce garment merchandise for companies. Actually, some of them are here in the US. Or they're being sent back home to be on 24-hour house arrest. And then the worst part about all of this is the fact that these camps are essentially wired to essentially make you die at the end of it. Like there have been reports of hundreds, not thousands of deaths.
The viewers are seeing some of the conditions, how the cells are. There's 15 people in a cell. Each floor has about 28 cells. This is one of their re-education centers, right?
So this is, so what you guys see on this slide right here is part of a report that was released by Bitter Winter. And essentially this construction worker had sneaked in this camera before people were actually put into this camp to like shed light and to show how this camp was constructed. And essentially it looks like a prison facility. So in this particular camp, this is actually seems relatively better because it says 15 people are supposed to fit in a cell. Each floor has 28 cells. There's 3 classrooms where teacher and students are separated by iron wires. This particular facility can detain more than 15,000 people. They have iron doors in all entrance. There's surveillance cameras on all cells, classrooms, toilets, and outside. So you are surveilled 24/7, even when you're using the bathroom. And the bathroom is not even a normal bathroom. They legit put like a bucket in each cell and make everyone share it.
Are there children? Are there children in these cells?
I'll get to that. So, and then obviously next to these jails are factory buildings. But yes, so the children, this is also a really heavy aspect of this whole situation. The children of these detainees are actually being sent to orphanages and boarding schools where they are taught to hate their own religion, identity, and are essentially being forcibly assimilated into the Chinese state. And they are not told where their parents are. The parents don't know where the kids are. They're going through immense trauma, obviously. And they're being made into orphans even when their parents are still alive in these camps. Or if they're not in these orphanages or boarding schools, they're actually being abandoned on the streets because their parents are just gone. They just been detained like out of nowhere and like that's it. Or they're being taken care of by like their like really old grandmother who has to, who's like trying to feed all these young children by herself. So like a lot of the towns and villages are actually, you walk through the street and it's like eerily empty. It's eerily silent because it's just everyone is like gone now. Like shops have been closed down, houses have been closed down because there's no one actually inhabiting these homes. But going back to the actual concentration camps, I wanted to also touch base on some of the torture happening in these camps. And if you want to change the slide to that so you can have more specifics. But essentially in these camps, the detainees are being subject to horrible, horrible forms of torture and eventual death. So women are being forcibly sterilized. They're being raped. People are being lethally injected. Actually, one of my relatives was lethally injected November of 2017. And we found out the summer after that he had passed away. And when he passed away, we actually thought we found out the summer after that he actually passed away in the camps. But when we found out in November that he had died, we didn't know that he was even in the camp. And then we found out later it was through injection. People are being subject to organ harvesting, which is a huge industry within China now. They take these prisoners or detainees and who are healthy, and they essentially use these bodies to take all the organs and and use them essentially to make money. And then obviously in that process, these bodies are being killed. And what's crazy about this whole thing is that even when people die, their bodies are not taken to their families, but rather the bodies are actually cremated in order to hide the evidence of bodies coming out of these camps. And it's also another way to subvert the Islamic tradition of burying bodies alive. Burying bodies, because we know cremation is not part of the Islamic tradition. But that's again another way to not give us a clear idea of how many people are dying.
So we just had an image of a sister who was detained and what she suffered through. How did we find out about her? Did she get out? Did she escape? What's her story?
This is the sister who it doesn't mention her name, but she seems like it was two of her brothers were executed in front of her.
Three.
Or
two in front of her. Third one was also executed.
Yeah.
Her father died. Her mother died at home. Yeah, she was raped.
Was she someone who escaped from?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
So I actually don't know her story that much. I just was focusing on the torture methods, but I believe she's actually either in Turkey or in Canada. I believe she's in Turkey, and she has been opened herself up for giving testimony and showing exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But you can see through some of the things that they do, other than the physical torture, the forced indoctrination that they go through, they're forced to shout Communist Party Akbar. So they're essentially replacing Allah with Communist Party. And then they would humiliate them by saying okay, call your God if your God is really going to save you.
Yeah.
She shows a lot of the scars on her body as well.
There was another sister you were sending. You gave us some information about, who I think her identity is much more open, and I'm just pulling that up for them right now. But can you tell us a little bit about Sister Tursan? I'm not going to pronounce this right. Mirgul Tursan. This year's a shot in.
Yeah, Mirgul Tursan. Yeah. So her story. We actually invited her a few weeks ago to come to Duke to actually talk on her experiences, and it was crazy because there were counter protests by Chinese international students who were essentially passing out articles claiming that everything that she was stating was a lie, and that she was just that she was detained because she was inciting ethnic hatred between ethnic Han and Uyghurs. So that was an interesting experience. But Mehrgul Tursun is a 29-year-old Uyghur woman who spent three times in Chinese detention, and she was actually living in Egypt, studying there, to get her master's. And she got married, she got pregnant, and she gave birth to triplets. And after she gave birth to triplets, she figured that it was really hard to take care of the babies on her own while her husband was at work. So she decided to go back to East Turkestan to have her mom help raise the babies when they're at such a young age, because there were 3 babies at once. And as soon as she goes back to East Turkestan, she immediately gets detained. The babies are taken away from her, and this is when she's first detained in 2015, and at this point her babies are around 2-3 months old, and she eventually gets released just sometime later, because they claim that okay, your children are sick now. One of them is in critical condition, especially, and they bring her to outside of this room where she can see her child in an incubator, and it's lifeless. She can't go near it. And the next day they say, oh, your baby didn't make it. And they told her that they operated on these babies. First she had asked how did my baby die, and they didn't tell her why. And she later found out they had operated on her 3 babies through medical experimentation. Mm-hmm. And to this day, she still doesn't know exactly what she did to her 3 kids. And one of them obviously had passed away. And at the time that she was detained, she was first detained, her babies were healthy. So
I remember reading the story. Yeah. I remember this. Yeah. It's very heartbreaking. So the Chinese authorities,
and so she, they essentially murder her child, and she's taken to house arrest and then taken to detention once more, and then just basically she goes through these forms of torture. She gets electrically shocked, is sent to solitary confinement for 7 days. She's one of the psychological forms of torture that they use is they claim that like, oh, your mom, your dad, and your like family have all died, or they have, or like some of them have been sent to prison because of you. Like we've killed them because of you, and that it wasn't true at the time, obviously, because like it was just a way for her to like answer the questions that they were interrogating her with. But essentially, she goes through these forms of torture, and then she claims that within her second or third detention, I'm forgetting the exact moment, but she talked about how there were 68 women in her cell, and how 9 women within 3 months had died in front of her, either through not being medically treated, through torture, through psychological. Like there's one lady who, and she was talking about how they would be forced to take pills that would like cause them to stop bleeding for menstruation, or it would cause some woman to bleed heavily. It would cause, one woman had seized in front of her, and they just dragged the woman away and like took her away, and that was it. There are people. Sorry, it's like really heavy stuff.
No, take a break, because it's heartening as much as it's painful for me to see you get emotional about it. But from people from my generation, I don't know, I'm like late 30s, early 40s, people who grew up in the time of Bosnia and Chechnya, and when a lot of these types of genocides were taking place, sadly, a lot of us have kind of become indifferent, and we've kind of lost our humanity. And that's why I think many of them today don't eat. I mean, you'll see a lot of practicing Muslims, take up causes like, Black Rights Matter, and as they should. There's some great, amazing things that you can partake in, but you see that there's a lot of there's people who just have gone indifferent to the genocide of Muslims, and it's very painful to see that that people just don't care anymore, and we lost our sense of humanity, and we need to get that back. It's like it's a situation where we're kind of resigned to our fate. You remember when the Mongols? You hear about a lot of the stories about the Mongols, and I don't know if you've read some of these stories, but the people when the Mongols were attacking the Muslims in Persia and in Baghdad, the people were just resigned to their fate. They're like, go ahead and kill us, and they just laid down their swords. And this is kind of the situation that we're in right now. That people are just so defeated that, you know what, I'm not even gonna pay attention to things like genocide. I'm not going to even talk about it. It's not worth my effort. It's not even worth a tweet. It's not worth spreading this information on social media. Something that costs you nothing.
No, and then Muslims, like, these days we're not even organized enough. I remember when that article came out saying that China is now calling Islam a mental illness. I remember some of the U.S. Muslim organizations were trying to get everybody to sign a statement together, all these mental health organizations, Muslim mental health organizations, sign a statement together saying this is not right, that our government needs to say something, that you can't call religion, a mental illness and whatnot. But we could even get our Muslims organized enough to sign a simple document or put a simple document together. But I wanted to say, like, so what can we do as Muslims? Like, we see, like, I know that I think I was reading one of your articles, but it was basically saying that, a lot of countries have tried to say something, but they have so many economic ties to China that they're kind of in a bind. Like, they're financially, they're like, we can only say so much, but we've got all our money tied up with China right now, so we're just sadly that's the case. Turn another,
well, I mean, how do you feel about, like, fellow Turks, people who are leaders of NATO, like Erdogan and in Turkey, be largely silent? I mean, there might be a couple words of support that comes here and there, but largely these guys have so much money tied to China. Their economies are so dependent on Chinese interests that they're largely silent. They won't do anything.
Yeah, so that's definitely been one of the greatest frustrations we as Uyghur activists or the community has faced, is witnessing the absolute silence on this genocide that we see. Like we see 21st century concentration camps being built and holding like 3 to 5 million people in these camps, and they're being essentially sentenced to death, or and forced to become Chinese or essentially die. And we see this happening, and we have enough evidence. There's literally satellite imagery showing the construction of these camps, and we've located at least 1,200 camps within all of East Turkestan, and there's still more to be found. And we have testimonies of thousands of people being of thousands of testimonies being released of people like trying to shed light on the fact that their mom or dad or grandfather is missing, and that they haven't had contact with anyone there to figure out if they're even alive or dead. And so this kind of crisis has been so taxing, like to the Uyghur diaspora community, obviously to people there. Like words can't even describe how horrific the atrocities are there, because even if you're not in the camps, obviously you are, you're still like it's like a dungeon, because you're monitored. You're not allowed to speak your own language. You're not allowed to practice your religion. You're like always on the verge of eventually being sent to a camp. So going back to the pinpoint of the silence of Muslim majority of countries in general, actually, specifically for the longest time, every single Muslim majority country was silent, even when they knew about these atrocities occurring. And so and again, it's mainly because of their economic ties to China, and the fact that China is using the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is a multi-trillion-dollar initiative started by the Chinese government in 2013 to essentially create basically like routes along Central Asia and like the maritime routes to Africa to essentially harness like this economic power over these countries, and to claim that these countries are going to be getting these like really easy loans, and that this would help their economy, and that this is a good way to bridge relations between China and these countries. So a lot of these countries like Pakistan, so many countries in Africa, even Turkey, and so much of these countries have been like very pressured by China to remain absolutely silent. So I remember when Pakistan had actually said a statement expressing concern over the camp, saying like, and they try to say it in a more low-key way, saying like, hey, this is not the way to deal with extremists. Like, there's actually a better way. But that was their way of trying to like kind of help out China, but in a way that like would like lessen the repression towards us. And when they make this claim, that China essentially forced them to retract that statement and say that was never said. But most recent news, alhamdulillah, this is something that was positive within our community, was 2 weeks ago, actually Turkey finally broke its silence and criticized China for these camps. And what had sparked that to break that silence was the fact that there was a rumor going around stating that one of the prominent Uyghur musicians had been killed in Chinese prison. And that was like a huge, and this Uyghur musician is known throughout the Turkic world. He had gone to Turkey multiple times to give performances. People in Turkey love him. So when they heard that he had died, that was just like that drew the line for Turkey, and they essentially finally spoke out. And so,
but that created, is it true, or was it a rumor?
So this is interesting. This is, for a while, like all of us, even myself, we all thought, okay, yeah, he died, and I even shared on my social media that he had passed away. And then the next day, China actually released a supposed video showing Abdurrahim Hayat, the singer, alive. Basically in the video, he's like forced to say like, today is February 10th, 2019. I'm here in detention. I'm alive, but I have not been abused, and I just want everyone to know that I'm fine, right?
Yeah.
But that video itself was really like iffy, because as soon as I watched it, like you can see like the mouth didn't really sync up with the audio, and then people who were doing research like was realizing the video and the audio were a little bit off, and there's actually like like AI, there's like certain forms
of
where you can actually like just make it seem like it actually looks
pretty
like
easy. It's not very complicated.
But it looks, my first instinct was that this is fake, or even if it's real, like what if this is China's way of like, maybe they had recorded this video before they had actually killed him, and then because they knew they were going to expect this outrage from the international community.
Wow.
And to release this video to make us look bad and to like decrease our credibility and be like, hey, look at these Uyghurs, they love to spread lies about us. look at them spreading fake news, and look where he's alive and he's okay. But either way, it looked bad on their part, because they're like, oh, either way, it's like, why are you detaining a musician, right? Because of his music, like obviously you see him as a threat. So there was good that came out of it either way, because from that video that was released, this launched the hashtag #MeTooUyghur campaign, which essentially is a social media campaign where Uyghurs kind of, wrote hashtag #MeTooUyghur, and then asked, and they were like, if you can release a video of Abdurrahim Hayat alive, then show the video of my mom alive, or show the video of my uncle alive, or in these camps.
Yeah.
So that created, like, it was a massive scene.
This was just recently, like this month?
Yeah. It's still going. It's still ongoing.
Last
like
couple
it was
weeks.
Yeah, so it's 2 weeks ago that this rumor that he had passed away was spreading, and then that campaign kind of exploded, and it's still going on now. Like if you search it up on Twitter, you'll see lots of testimonies being released of people.
No, you're studying things like international relations and stuff at a prestigious university such as Duke, but when you see the United States using North Korea to leverage pressure on China, but not using the plight of the Uyghurs, what's your analysis on that? What do you think about that?
So the United States is actually using the plight of the Uyghurs as a way to like advance their agenda against China. So they're using, like, you have far right congressmen who like support the Muslim ban, who support the wall that's supposed to be built, that they're trying to build in the Mexico-American border, people who are supporting these family separation policies. These far right congressmen who are supporting this, they're ironically, but not surprisingly, shedding light on the fact that China is detaining like millions of people in these camps, and they're talking about the human rights violation. They're focusing a lot of their issues on human rights within China. They also focus a lot on Tibet as well. They've provided funding. They've recently provided $30 million in funding for the Tibetan exile, the exile community, and Trump recently signed a bill to essentially allow journalists and foreigners to enter the Tibetan region in order to shed light on the human rights abuses occurring. So it's interesting because the Trump administration, this is one issue that they're actually talking about, and they're using this as a way to. They're kind of using any chance that they can get to.
Of course, I mean,
China,
it sounds like
it's using we're benefiting off of it, obviously.
Right. This is how they play politics. They don't genuinely care about the plight of North Koreans or the Uyghurs. It's just a way that they
can further
they can put the squeeze on China for their own negotiations and things like that. And you heard about that as well when initially. Trump was talking about challenging the one China policy, and that kind of got them very upset.
What recently, I remember there was someone in our community that was afraid to speak out about Uyghurs because he has family. Do you know what I'm talking about? Someone has family over there, and they were like, it's very dangerous. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, as being a Muslim here, a Uyghur here, how does that affect,
Well, there's Muslim Han Chinese Muslims in America who are passionately for the Uyghur situation, but they can't say anything because they have family abroad. Talk a little bit about that.
They might not be Uyghur, they're Han.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is also a big issue within our community, is like even when we have demonstrations or protests in front of the White House or wherever, or in front of a Chinese embassy, there are actually Uyghurs who, choose not to go because they are afraid of being reported by essentially informants who could either be Uyghur or Chinese, and they essentially send their names back to the Chinese government, and the Chinese government then questions their family members and then potentially detains them or sends them to camps. So this is a real issue that actually happens and has made a lot of Uyghurs remain silent about their missing family members. But with increasing time, I think people started to realize that staying silent actually does worse, and doesn't actually do any good. So, for example, there was one example of a prominent scholar. Her name is Riley Dawood. She's done amazing research on, for example, Sufism within East Turkestan, and she's Uyghur herself. She had actually been detained for months, and she's still in detainment right now. She's still disappeared, and her family had decided to remain silent for, I think, 8 months or 6 or 8 months, until they finally realized that staying silent wasn't actually going to do anything. They thought that staying silent would enable her to eventually be released. But then people were like, okay, if everyone stays silent, then the world is not going to know about how horrible these atrocities are occurring and like to what extent. So people have been speaking out, and actually there have been instances where prominent like activists that I know who've been like vouching for the release of their parents have actually eventually seen their parents get released, or they haven't seen them, but they've heard that their parents have been released. So one of them is a doctor from Finland or the Netherlands, but his name is Halmurat, and his parents were detained in these camps. And we got the news that in December, after months and months of activism and spreading light on the fact that his parents were detained, they were eventually released. But unfortunately, that release simply means like house arrest. Like, it doesn't really mean that much, but it has been doing some like.
But how does that work? How does that work? Is it he's putting pressure on the Finnish government or to?
So he's essentially raising awareness in the entire world about like the atrocities and like
social media.
Using social media. So he's actually the one who started the hashtag #MeTooUyghur campaign as well, and has been using putting himself out there. Honestly, he was just like, everyone needs to know that my parents are in these camps, and the fact that there's like millions of other people in these camps. And so the hashtag #MeTooUyghur campaign actually made a lot of people go out finally onto camera and give testimonies.
Wow.
So, but the thing is, obviously testimonies are still very limited. Like, there's only a few thousand testimonies that have been released, but if you put a few thousand versus like 3 million, for example, that's like nothing, right?
Yeah.
There's still so many people who aren't being represented, whose names aren't being put out, who are being killed off every day in these camps.
Well,
I was just going to ask.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask a question because my parents went to China just a few years ago. It wasn't too many. It was 2 or 3 years ago, I feel like. And they went to, all the big cities, Shanghai, Beijing, whatever. And then they went to the Han area, and they, the Muslim, Chinese were there, and they had halal food and all that stuff. So today, if a Muslim, if tourists were to go there, what would they experience?
So this is something that a lot of people push back on. They're like, oh, like Islam, what do you mean Islam is forbidden? Like, I go to China all the time, and like there's masjids, there's halal food, and everyone's super friendly. There's a lot of Chinese Muslims practicing, but that particular like occurrence is allowed in mainland China. So the Hui Muslims, like Chinese Muslims, are able to practice religion, right? Although there have been increasing crackdown lately on religious practice, like they've destroyed a couple mosques in mainland China, but generally, like, religious freedom is allowed, and there isn't necessarily this problem of dealing with these, or like Hui Muslims aren't being rounded up into concentration camps, for example, and that's because there isn't like a territorial like issue here. There isn't territorial fight here, whereas with the Uyghurs there is, and obviously there's like the quote threat of what they claim is like everyone here is like basically suspect to being terrorists. Yeah. But going back to, so if a tourist or a foreigner were to try to enter the East Turkestan region specifically, honestly, right now they've actually been driving a lot of foreigners out of the region. It's like really hard to go to China in the first place. People who've gone there have like written blog articles about how they would, try to go to they'd be going to Kashgar, for example, and then they would try to stay at a hotel, and they would basically turn them away, saying that there's no space in the hotel, even though there is space, and essentially turn them away. And we were activists. We kind of guess that this is a way to kind of hide the genocide that they're carrying out. They know journalists and everyone this is a hot topic for a lot of the world right now. And even journalists who try to enter the region, they're being turned away. There have been like documentaries, like people have been creating documentaries to like try to shed light on what's happening. And the entire documentary has essentially been shifted to be about how the fact that they were monitored the entire time they were in East Turkestan. Like there would be like a black car following them everywhere they went. And essentially, as soon as they tried interviewing people or they tried to get more insight into the concentration camps, they would be turned away and stopped, or the material would be confiscated. So if you go so there are actually lots of ethnic Han tourists, so Chinese people within China going to East Turkestan. They go to our region, and our mosques have like been turned into cultural propaganda centers. They're completely empty now, and they've been some of them have been turned into bars, where people can drink alcohol. Worst forms of cultural appropriation happen, and you have ethnic Han like literally posing in Uyghur homes that have been emptied out because the inhabitants of these homes have been sent to camps, and they're like, oh, look how beautiful their furniture is, their culture is, like this is how they set up to eat. So they're using like our culture as a way to make these profits. Their Sufi shrines have been completely shut down, or like you can't access them unless you're a tourist and you go and you get to tour these facilities. But and then there's like Chinese people who've like taken the Uyghur food, which is like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried Uyghur food, but it's a lot of people love it, especially people in China. I honestly, like a lot of my friends too who aren't Uyghur, but they've taken our foods and like essentially built Uyghur restaurants run by Han Chinese, and the waiters are Han Chinese, and then they turn away Uyghurs who like enter the restaurant. So they're like making profit off of the food of Uyghurs while like at the same time like a cultural genocide and actual genocide place.
Yeah, your Uyghur food looks amazing. I haven't had it yet, but I mean, I see.
Yeah, the pulled noodles.
Yeah,
right, hand pulled noodles.
There's a great Uyghur restaurant, I think somewhere in San Francisco, or California somewhere. But yeah, a lot of people talk about that one restaurant. But as soon as I have the chance,
I think one of my friends just traveled to Uzbekistan, and I believe she went to one there.
Yeah.
And then there's one. I know we have Boys in the Cave podcast. They've got one in Melbourne. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to find one so that we can go and try it out. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if you wanted to show that side, but I wanted to ask, like, what can Muslims in the West do? Like, what can we do? And we're not, as non-Uyghur, like just regular Muslims. What can we do to help, put pressure or just help the plight of our fellow Muslims in East Turkestan?
Yeah. So the first step is actually raising awareness, because unfortunately, even to this day, even when you have like explosion of media about these camps, there's still like, I would say majority of the world still doesn't know that this is happening. And I think the biggest and that's the number one step, is raising awareness and talking about how horrible the situation is, because I think it's usually just kind of brushed over. If you guys have read 1984, like the Orwellian state that you see in that society, like it's essentially like the same, if not worse. I mean, because the Orwellian state, there in the 1984 there weren't camps as well, but now you have what we see in East Turkestan is unprecedented. You haven't seen this in any parts of the world, like to the extent where there's concentration camps, there's massive surveillance state, there's technology being employed to essentially control your every movement. It's really sad, because it's so hard to like get evidence of like physical evidence of all of this, because like journalists can't like really freely report on this issue. And so the way we were finding out is like through things like satellite imagery, people who've lived there and escaped, and then like just getting information from like Chinese people who work there or like live there. But sorry.
Yeah. So you were saying
about what to do. So raising awareness is number one. So use social media as a tool. You guys can follow, there's a bunch of Uyghur activists and Uyghur organizations that you can follow to get updated. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. My Twitter and Facebook are solely dedicated to this cause. I only post things related to this issue. So you can follow me on Twitter. It's my name, Aydin Anwar _ AYDIN ANWAR _ that's my Twitter. And then on Facebook, it's just my first and last name, Aydin Anwar. So you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook and keep updated with the current occurrences there. And then in addition to that, in terms of like actual action items, so Congress actually introduced a bill, and this was drafted by Senator Marco Rubio and a few others, and it's called the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of 2019. And essentially this act is, if passed, is going to focus on trying to sanction Chinese officials for their crimes against humanity, and demand the release of people from these camps, and ensure like religious ensure religious freedoms and other human rights. Because right now, like our focus is like trying to like make people breathe freely, because right now it's just like there's absolutely no freedom whatsoever. And what's interesting is that China actually calls our region the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which in the name itself is super ironic because number one, right now they're trying to erase everything that makes up who Uyghurs are, and number two, it's not autonomous in any way, shape, or form. And then again, Xinjiang is also one of those names that was used to rename our territory, which we find offensive. We also encourage the international community to not use the term Xinjiang and to not feed into that narrative, and to really just call it East Turkestan as a way to uplift the Uyghur voice and really shed light on the correct name of our territory. And then
do you think that China uses that to its advantage, like perhaps furthering its narrative that these Uyghurs are trying to create this independent nation called East Turkestan?
Right.
Do you think that could backfire possibly? I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah. So so calling it Xinjiang really does help their narrative, because when you say, okay, yeah, I'm from Xinjiang, it sounds like you're from China and that you're like Chinese. And Xinjiang actually means new territory, which is funny because when people say like, oh, Xinjiang has always been a part of China, like the name itself says the opposite,
It's like saying chai tea.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, they definitely, use that as part of their narrative. And it's interesting is that even saying the name East Turkestan or Sharqi Turkestan in the region or in China itself, that can like lead you to like imprisonment or like a death sentence. So it's like you can't even say the name East Turkestan. You can't even have the flag or see the flag ever. So a lot of people who lived there their whole life and have never gone out, they've never even heard of the term Sharqi Turkestan or East Turkestan or have seen the flag of our nation before. So in regards to the question about independence, they do see, East Turkestan, by calling East Turkestan, they see it as like you saying a political statement and you showing your support for an independent East Turkestan. Yeah. And so there have been independence movements, outside of the U.S. that have been promoting peaceful means of attaining independence, with the narrative being that, we're an occupied territory and we have the right to end this occupation. But China has used that has used this particular movement to further crack down on Uyghurs. Unfortunately, it's saying that, okay, look, these people exist, and it's because of these people that you guys are becoming, quote, radicalized, and why we need to put you into these like re-education facilities and basically rewire your mind and re-engineer your body and the way you think.
Do you think a boycott of some sort would work? I know some people like on Twitter have been calling for a Chinese boycott, and I was kind of curious because, as much as I would love for a boycott to work in this type of situation, it just seems like a very difficult goal because of how much comes, how much product that comes from China into our families, right?
Yeah,
and then into our households.
Yeah, I would definitely say, that's something that even I struggle with. And I'm like, yeah, we can say boycott China all as much as you want, but literally everything's made in China. Like everyone has iPhones nowadays, and those are all made in China, right? Yeah. So, having more practical means of boycotting is really important, but also like everyone should still make the effort to boycott, and also keep in mind of the companies that are operating within East Turkestan. There was actually an article released talking about the top 500 companies that are operating and creating business in East Turkestan. Some of these companies have been directly complicit in the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Uyghur people. One of them, I mentioned how there were factories being built within these concentration camp facilities, and how the manufacturers was traced back to sport. It's called, I think, sportswear or sports gear. And it was based in North Carolina. And basically this company essentially is what produces like the jerseys for college athletes to wear. And with pressure, we people were saying boycott this company because they're essentially being created by modern day slaves who are essentially subject to ethnic cleansing. And alhamdulillah, I think they stopped. They released a statement saying that they've stopped their relations with our business in China. Eric Prince, that's another huge one that's been coming about his businesses in China, and we've been trying to come up with ways to pressure.
Wait, who?
Pressure Eric Prince.
Oh, Eric.
He's
Who is he?
He's an American businessman, and he is, I think, has a really pretty generally like a bad reputation in terms of the businesses that he's carried out. But one of the things that he's been doing is creating business in East Turkestan, the East Turkestan region itself, and directly getting profit off of it, and being super close to these camps and remaining silent about it. So he's been one person that's been kind of getting a little bit of pressure and criticism for. So we're trying to create like essentially initiatives to block off businesses that are happening, because these are all complicit. Also, another big thing is like pressuring universities, if they have strong ties with China, which is a high likelihood, to essentially pressure your university to cut off ties with China, and really shed light. So within my university, for example, Duke actually has campus in China. It's called the Duke Kunshan University. And because of their relations with China, like they've essentially remained silent on this whole issue. And so when I organized this event a few weeks ago on the plight of the Uyghurs, and that was my attempt to like try to break that silence and really like shed light and make Duke like no longer silent, and to really like make this a vital conversation that's taking place, because like and I feel like China really cares about its relationships with especially like elite universities. And I know Cornell, for example, recently cut off their ties with the Chinese institute that they have, because of like human rights abuses and academic restrictions on academic freedoms. And so these are huge moves. They may seem small, but they're huge in the sense that China will, I feel like with more and more action taking place like this, like China will eventually like see its impact, because they send, they have like thousands and thousands of Chinese international students who are studying in these American universities. And if these universities are not taking part in this conversation at all and are pretending like it's not happening, then these universities are complicit, and Duke is honestly one of them. And that's been one of my greatest frustrations being a student here, is like I'm the only Uyghur person on this campus, and it also feels super isolating and very frustrating to know like, oh my God, like my relatives are in these camps, they're being tortured every single day, I don't even know if they're alive or dead. Meanwhile, my university is like functioning a whole campus in China, they're taking so much pride in it, they're pretending like everything's okay. And like, I'm like, wow, like I promise you within like 20 years, let's say this genocide is taken out to its full extent, inshallah, that does not happen. But if in the case it does, we're going to be building like a Holocaust museum for the Uyghurs. And then we're going to be like, oh my God, how did this happen? How did we not know? Yeah. Why didn't anyone do anything about it? And that's essentially how the Holocaust took place. Everyone knew it was happening, and then no one actually took the action to stop what was happening. So yeah. I have this like really, it's
I mean
so
that's exactly
like, really
how
stark vision of the future, and like how I feel like a museum will definitely be created. Be like, oh my God, this is the genocide of the Uyghurs. Like, how did this happen? There were concentration camps, like, and I'm just like, yeah, but it's happening right now, and we still have the chance to do something about it. But like, look, you have China buying science. Money really just, messes everything up.
Yeah, of course, and that's the main thing. You see, all kinds of causes kind of getting brushed under the rug, even like just things related to BDS, or even criticizing Saudi Arabia for its relationships with with all kinds of shady characters. But whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, all leaders are silent because they have financial stakes in these countries, and they don't want to hurt those stakes. And I think it's very important that young Muslims start getting more aware of that, and start putting more pressure on their leaders that, hey, you know what, we understand you have some kind of relationship in this country, but you should, if you want to be our voice, you better be prepared to take a stand on things that might not be the best in the best interest of your wallet.
Yeah, someone in the chat actually said, I have some businesses with factories in China, and I can cancel them and tell them why. But such an action seems so irrelevant and small. What's the best action to take? But I think no action is too small, right?
Or
If we
Yeah,
have
I agree.
a bunch of people,
Yeah.
but
doing-
organizing, I think, I mean, just imagine if Chicago had someone like Aydin here, and I know there's so many active MSAs in Chicago. It's a very it's a hub for a lot of active young Muslims, and if we could have a contact like that to perhaps bring more attention to the issue, because people don't want to talk about something and look silly about it, and if they had someone like you, they would be able to perhaps bring this to some sort of platform and make an issue about it, right?
yeah.
Someone else I see in the chat asked, my university has some very close relationships with China. What can I do? Is it just holding an event or speaking to management? I think it can be a variety of things. I think the biggest thing is actually mobilization, like finding a group of people. Like if you are part of an MSA, like for example, I'm president of MSA at Duke, and like I use that as a way to like basically get funding to like create that event that I've always wanted to do. Like and like inviting media over, and actually speaking to administration and bringing this issue to light and being like, yo, there's like literally people being slaughtered and like or being like subject to ethnic cleansing in China, and we're maintaining these tight relations with this institute that we have. So can we like at least say, like, actually I think a big step is actually like if the university can say something, that's a huge step forward, because China really like does care about its image. And like when Turkey like criticized China, for example, 2 weeks ago, like that really upset China. And so if these universities can at least say something or brings the issue to light and pretend like not just gloss over as if nothing is happening, that is the first step. And so, you know, if this person wants to, you know, honestly, they could even do it themselves to like set up an appointment with a few administrators and really talk about how important this issue is. That's a first step. But I think mobilizing organizations, raising awareness on campus, and do keep in mind that it's going to be definitely met with backlash from people from China who are pro-government. But that's just part of the fight. You just keep going and say the truth, because
Yeah.
Well, one of the main things that a lot of people need to understand is it's not necessarily the net result of your action that you see. You just, by you creating noise and having some of these countries get shaken a little bit by them trying to preserve their pristine image. A lot of businesses who are multinational corporations, before they invest in any country, they look at the stability of a country, and they want to make sure that they're investing or they're setting up a factory or whatever kind of business in a country that is stable. And when you challenge the stability of a nation, that pisses people off. And I think you don't underestimate your effort in spreading the message, because just projecting that kind of image of China as a country that is committing genocide and a Holocaust of sort on ethnic Uyghur Muslims, you're just doing a huge service right there. But and tweets, Facebook posts, they're free. They don't cost you anything. So go out there and spread the word.
Yeah, and also shameless plug. So there's two things. There's a huge protest for the Uyghurs, I believe on April 6th in DC. So if you're in the area, do come out to that. And I think if you search it up, it'll definitely come up on Google. That's inshallah going to be a huge step forward in terms of mobilizing large groups of people. And also another one is actually around a month ago, I launched a campaign with a few of my friends on Launch Good. It's a crowdfunding campaign for crowdfunding campaign to support Uyghur women and orphans in Turkey, because when I had gone to Turkey the past 3 times, every single time I'd witnessed the extreme financial distress that they were going through, because their family members were either in the concentration camps, in prison, had been killed, had disappeared, and obviously during this like this horrible trauma, and like the least we can do is at least alleviate some of their financial stresses. And because we can't help people directly in East Turkestan, I figured like we can at least try to help those in diaspora and the refugees. So I started that campaign, and alhamdulillah, it's already reached like $72,000. But it's still open, and we encourage everyone, if you type in Google, like support Uyghur women and orphans in Turkey on Google, it should come up. And I encourage everyone to donate and share this campaign. It's an ongoing campaign, and I'm going to be also going to be on the ground delivering a lot of these funds directly to the refugees and to the women and orphans, and seeing how it's being of impact. And 70, like in dollars, if you like convert that into Turkish liras, it's I would say it's a lot more. That's a lot of money. So, if this money can be, kept sustainable and like ongoing, because it's eventually going to end. I encourage everyone to support.
What's the best way someone who's young, MSA student in part of their university, who should they reach out to if they're trying to get a hold of a Uyghur rights activist? Should they reach out to you directly, or should they go to an organization that you would recommend? Is there an organization you would recommend, because you see a lot of them on Twitter, but you're not sure who you should actually support?
Yeah. So definitely, like, if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm open. You guys can message me on Facebook or Twitter. I have my messages open, and I try my best to respond back to everyone and direct them to other people or other organizations that can help out, especially specifically with like MSA, like event planning, or like figuring out who to invite. Like I encourage people to just directly reach out to me, and I'll respond, because I've had people reach out to me and ask me those specific questions on like what to talk about and like how to arrange the event. And I'm also open to like going and speaking at these universities if that's something that people, if they want someone to speak, I'm definitely open to that.
Awesome.
But in terms of like organizations, there's actually multiple ones. There's different approaches that some organizations take. So there are like ones that are like who openly promote like independence of East Turkestan, and that could be like something easy as like the East Turkestan Government in Exile, the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement, and then there's ones that are focused more on like that are not openly promoting independence, and their whole premise is like human rights and autonomy, and that approach, and they're the World Uyghur Congress, the Uyghur Human Rights Project, and so these are all organizations that have been existing and doing a lot of work to advocate for essentially, inshallah, freedom and human rights for the Uyghurs before it's too late and before the genocide is wiped out. So people can look up at these organizations and see where they want to help and get involved with, but or they can just do their individual activism and just keep themselves aware, and do what they can within their local communities. Especially, and I would say, if you're a university student, do take advantage of your university, because once you leave college, like, it's hard to get funding. It's hard to have these spaces and resources available. So that's been my biggest thing that I've learned, because I'm graduating this semester, inshallah, and I'm like, oh my God, once I'm done with Duke, I'm not gonna have like all this like money and like this space and this ability to like do as much as what I'm doing now. So definitely do take advantage of that.
Well, Sister Aydin, I think you're a very talented young Muslim. I think hopefully, inshallah, if there's a few more of you that we could actually create, at least for the Uyghur cause, that we could somehow build some kind of movement towards bringing this to not just a Muslim attention, but an attention that all the people in the world can see that, hey, this is something that really needs to be looked at. This is a genocide of for God's sake. How could you ignore a genocide, in modern day? But thank you so much for joining us this evening. If there's anything that we missed out, would you like to let anyone know if we didn't cover something that you felt like was missed?
All I would say was just everyone who's listening, you might, and like everyone who's listening, obviously, please do whatever you can to spread the word and make this a topic of conversation that you have with friends and family when we're talking about oppressive states. Like, even in khutbahs, like, it's just been so sad. Like you'd go to khutbahs and they're making dua at the end and to all these oppressed nations and these people, and you never ever hear a mentioning of the Uyghur people for the longest time, right? And so biggest thing is make dua for us, for like keep us in your duas, because I think the biggest thing is, and what's made people actually Uyghur people very like pessimistic and very like hopeless, is the fact that like we felt like the Muslim Ummah has forgotten us. And it's just like, our situation compared to, I don't want to compare like oppressions or whatever, but it's like what we're seeing in East Turkestan is like it's like unprecedented. I don't think you've ever seen this in any part of the world ever, with the technology that we've seen, the concentration camps, the way that the crimes of humanity against humanity are completely hidden, the fact that practicing Islam is completely banned. Like you're essentially feel like you're suffocating. And you're like, people say that they're the Walking Dead. Like Uyghurs who've lived there, they've become envious of like actual genocides. Like they become envious of Rohingyas because they're like, at least they get to be killed off right away. We don't even get to die. We don't get to commit suicide because committing suicide is haram, and so we have to live through this every single day, and it's just like hell. It's like we're the Walking Dead. And so just that kind of statement has always rung with me, and I'm like, oh my god, like this is just like
that's so
profound.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're here, the fact that if you're living in a free world, in a free state, in a free community, you are in a huge advantage. And like be grateful. Every time you make sujood and you say assalamu alaikum, remember that what you're doing now, if you were to do that there, you'd be behind bars and like being tortured to death. So it's just like be grateful, and also just like amplify our voices because they're being erased. And
the worst thing you can do is just be indifferent. That's letting them win. If you want to do something that is helping the Chinese in their oppression, just be silent and act like you never heard about anything, and you've let them win. But thank you so much again, Sister Aydin. Well, hopefully, inshallah, we have a follow-up conversation, and we hope to hear more from you again in the future. For my co-host Noreen and Sister Aydin, my name is Sim. Assalamu alaikum.